welcome back to another episode of Semi-Woo. I'm Heather.
My name's Amanda, coming to you from Ecuador. And today on the show, we're so excited. We have with us comedian, psychonaut, and all-around awesome dude, Shane Mauss. Hello, Shane.
Hello.
Welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And to our listeners out there, again, we are in 3 different locations. I am in Ecuador. Heather, where are you?
I'm in Seattle.
And Shane, where are you?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to point out that time and space are an illusion, but I am just outside of Portland, Washington.
Physical place?
Portland, Oregon, in Vancouver, Washington.
Whoa.
When I say Vancouver, then people think I'm talking about Canada. And so I usually just say Portland, and then I just screwed it up and said Portland, Washington. And so I had to explain why that happened.
Very interesting.
Heather and I are a hop and a skip and a couple cartwheels away from one another.
Could have had a cup of coffee before this. Could have come
Very
right down.
cool, guys. Well, you will be happy to know that we got a bunch of rain last night, so I know what you guys are feeling. We got a big storm, and our Wi-Fi was knocked out, and so at least we can be together in spirit of the rain.
Imagine
which I know
that
you
for
guys.
6 months.
No,
And that is more like it.
I don't wish my rain on anybody.
No.
Oh, that's very sweet.
I don't care for it. Though I'm from Wisconsin, so I just moved here this year. So this is my first winter in the Portland area. But I'm from Wisconsin, and I'll take Portland's weather is pretty mild. It's just rainy, so it's in the 50s and stuff. So I'll take that over Wisconsin weather in February.
Jeez, absolutely.
Very true. All right, guys. So to introduce Shane a little bit, I'm sure you have heard of his very popular podcast, Here We Are, which interviews science experts across the country in a journey to find out what makes us who we are. And what does make us who we are? Where are we? But I met Shane in Jamaica, where we were both. He was performing Jamaica at Myco Meditations, and I was facilitating at this awesome 10-day mushroom retreat. So we had the pleasure of staying in this beautiful Airbnb that had a pool overlooking the ocean. I mean, that was absolutely fantastic and really beautiful. People.
That hot tub was really bunk, though.
Yeah, our hot tub was not hot.
Our hot tub.
It was basically a tiny bit warmer than the pool. It was
a small pool.
Not selling it.
We'll have to tell the leaders of Myco Meditations that we refuse to come back until they get that hot tub hotter. Until
this hot tub situation is fixed.
So Shane, why don't you take a few minutes? Tell us. So we hear you're from Wisconsin. Give us a little bit of a razz about you, and tell our Semi-Woo audience who you are.
Who are any of us, really? Let's see, I started off just a small, wholesome boy in Wisconsin, and with big dreams of being a stand-up comedian. I want to deliver my whole bio like that.
Please do.
I'm a stand-up comedian. I've been doing stand-up for 15 years this year. I think 12 years full time. I was pretty lucky and caught some breaks early on in my career and got to be on TV and all that good stuff. And then when that happened, I had enough kind of TV credits to allow me to make a living out there on the road.
Awesome.
And I've been entertaining folks ever since. So how I got to where I am today, which is different. So I started out as a late night comedian, kind of with short jokes that were kind of absurdist.
How late is late night comedy? Oh my God, it seems like it.
Well, it records in the afternoon, actually. So, but it airs. I don't know, 11 o'clock for a lot of people. And And so I kind of accomplished all of my stand-up goals that I had in like the first 5 years I was doing it, but I found myself traveling internationally, and internationally all these people do these like solo shows, these themed shows, and that's something that doesn't really happen much in the US. And I thought I want to do that, and so I started thinking about kind of what I would want to be talking about. And I always read a fair amount of like science stuff here and there. Not a lot because I was drunk all of the time. But I'm like a weirdo, and I'll like be hammered and get home and like open up a science book and learn about neuroscience or something.
Said no one ever.
That's Shane.
Well, it's weird because
when I get wasted, I like reading about neuroscience.
Yeah, I get
That's
wasted
awesome.
and read neuroscience and don't retain any of it. But that's what I just liked to do. And so I was like, well, maybe I'll do some science themed shows, and or like Hollywood was always like Hollywood doesn't give a fuck about stand-up comedy, and they always want you to like pitch a sitcom or something like that. So I started putting together, I was like, maybe I'll make a show with like some science in it. And within doing that, I had reached out to a bunch of scientists and connected with a few of them, got to be friends with a few scientist friends, and then I had like these really interesting conversations. I was just used to like getting really drunk with a bunch of other comedians, but I had all of these questions about life, and I was always going on and on about my weird ideas to people while I was drunk, but I never had like anyone else to talk to. I would get drunk and just talk about how the brain works forever to like people that didn't want to listen. And so finally I had this outlet for it, and I was like, this is awesome. People need to hear these conversations. And that's when my podcast called Here We Are, and I started traveling around. In my travels, I look up like neuroscientists and psychologists and behavioral economics people, and that's
how willing are scientists to sit down. And I love that like one night you were probably wasted with a science book, and you're like, what if this book were a person?
Yeah. That's literally, I was just like, I'll just email this person and see. Like at the time, I thought I was trying to just find some people in LA to maybe put on like a live show or something like that. Yeah. But it evolved into something else.
How willing are people to sit down and talk with you? Because like we're talking about scientists here, so not normal like entertainers.
Well, at first it was really hard because people thought I was like making fun of them or going to be making fun of them, or like, you know, when you don't like, yeah, I mean, you don't, especially like the first 20 or so when I didn't have like I think I recorded 10 before I released any, so there wasn't a website or anything like that for anyone to look at. So people were just like, is this real, or is this a practical joke? Or so I would like just sit on the phone with someone forever, like talking. No, I'm actually interested in what you do. I would have to read so much about like an individual's work, and then like make a bunch of like jokes about their work to them, just like charm them into coming on my show. Now I'm 3.5 years into it, and they can look and see that like a bunch of their colleagues have done the show.
Yeah.
Wow.
I have.
Amazing.
I've gotten some pretty big scientists. People, I mean, no one knows scientists, but to me, they're like my hero. Like I had this guy, Robert Sapolsky, who is like, to me, like my Michael Jordan or something.
Wow.
Science. So no one would know.
Are you aiming for like Neil deGrasse Tyson? Like, is that the zenith of this?
I might start getting into physics stuff, and I like physics, but I mostly concentrate on stuff that really affects like the day to day. So like the last 3 episodes that I've recorded, like the next 3 that are coming out, one is about this UCLA woman who is the world's leading specialist on ovulation and like how it affects personalities and like sexual desires and that sort of thing. So she wrote a book called Hormonal, so it's all about that. And then the episode after that was all about rewards and how how monetary rewards are flawed in many ways, and people like being rewarded by like recognition and achievements, usually more than like a monetary raise. Even though they might consciously think that they want the raise more, they actually want like the trophy or the parking spot or like the award at the end of the year. Usually gives people more satisfaction. So we just did an episode about that, and then the last episode that I recorded was all about happiness and how we use our time. And again, it had a money attachment to it. So if people think more about time than they do about money, you can time people in various ways. When people are thinking more about time, they tend to be more social and tend to just be enjoying life a lot more when they're more time oriented. Then rather when they're money oriented, they just spend more of their time like on the computer or working extra hours at the job that they don't like and that sort of thing. So it's all stuff that is to say, I just wanted to give a few examples of the sorts of things that we talk about. It's all stuff that like you learn about it, and then hopefully it makes you just more mindful in your everyday life about why certain things affect your mood and how to create a better life for yourself through science.
That's a huge link. No, that's such a huge link.
That's really
like
awesome.
A lot of meditations start like when people first start meditating, it's like body scans, like this connection with your body and its processes and the way you feel just in your physical self. Like that's the way to tap people into a mindfulness practice. So I totally get that.
That's awesome.
It took me forever during a body scan to be like, oh, this part feels good. They're like, just note if something feels like bad or if something feels good, just note it. And like nothing ever felt good. It's just like, well, either something feels bad or normal. It never felt good. And then after like, but it's funny. Our brains kind of negativity bias because that's just what our brain's more on the lookout for.
Right.
So after like a year or so of meditating, finally I was like, hey, this part of my leg feels good today for some reason.
Wow.
That stuff takes a lot of time.
It does. That's interesting that you mentioned that. I'd love to talk about your meditation practice because that's obviously something that Heather and I not only talk about but joke about a lot. And I joke about a lot with people who come to this retreat center is I ask them, I'm like, raise your hand if you've thought about meditation and read about it and are interested in it. That's most people, right? Like we spend so much time before we begin meditating thinking about it, learning about it, reading about it, watching videos like about it. Like our brain wants to know about it as opposed to just doing it.
Right.
How long did your meditation practice that you have and kind of take for you before you actually started beginning to notice these quote unquote, the good feelings or the good things that you read about that happen? When did they start happening for you?
Mine was like 2 or 3 weeks. It was really fast.
Well, Shane, great.
What's especially surprising about that is I just like didn't believe in, like I was a skeptic, and so I was like, whatever. Like I just it was part of this like challenge as like this overall well-being thing as part of the CrossFit that I was in at the time or whatever. And one of the challenges was to meditate for a week. And so I downloaded this app, Headspace, started doing the guided meditations. And after a week, I started noticing a little something, even though I was like, this is a bunch of bullshit. Like every day I was just like, nope. That was stupid. And then after a week, I'm like, oh, maybe it's actually working a little bit. I feel a little bit different. And now I very much believe in it. Though I do think, like, part of me thinks that we put too much on, well, one, just on like the sitting actual guided meditation part. And I mean, I guess it takes a lot of that before you can be more mindful in everyday life. But the thing that bothers me is people don't ever talk about like contemplation. There's no like that well, I'm sure there are, but I don't know of any like contemplation exercises or apps out there or anything like that. Whereas like everyone's in the meditation game now. And sometimes it's like,
true.
I mean, sometimes when I'm meditating, I'm like, I let thoughts pass by and everything, but then afterwards I'm like, I let some really good thoughts just pass on.
I know. And I'm like, ooh, I kind of writing that one down.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's interesting that you say that, because contemplation it's a type of meditation, right? I mean, I think when you truly are in a state of contemplation, it's probably similar. I would love to see even brain scans of that. If you're in like talking even with someone or by yourself, if you're contemplating a very specific topic and you're able to shut down all of the other things your brain wants to think about, which it usually does, like it's multitasking. If that is a similar state where you're in more of that receiving mode, right? Where in meditation you're in more of a receiving of thoughts, receiving of, and that's why for me I never tell people not to think, because a lot of times meditation is where I receive thoughts, and I was like, if I just go, oh no, every thought is bad, I have to get rid of it, I'm not going to be able to receive these kind of completed ideas and completed thoughts that you do receive during meditation or contemplation, or like you said, kind of having a more meditative life, I think is the next step, where it doesn't have to be for 20 minutes a day I'm in meditation and for the rest of the day I'm not. Because a lot of times you can be in a meditative state throughout your day.
That's the goal. I was just reading about I get Eckhart Tolle's like newsletter in my email box, and people asked him like, how many minutes a day do you practice? Like, what's your meditation practice? He's like, I used to do Vipassana and this and that, but my meditation practice now is throughout my entire day. I work on staying mindful and present and aware. And I think that a lot of people are like, oh, I'm trying to meditate longer, but like the point of meditation isn't to be able to meditate longer. It's to be able to walk into your life and be plugged in and tapped in and aware and open and, like you said, in receiving mode. So, yeah.
Very true.
I play around with it. Like sometimes I'll take what I'm learning in meditation and then I'll just be like, I'm going to do the opposite and see what happens when I do that, just for fun. Like the idea of like letting a thought go. Sometimes I just instead sit and wait for the first thought to pop into my head, and then I just try to hold on to it and concentrate on it for as long as I possibly can. And that's also really interesting, because as you try to like hold on to a thought, the thought itself will keep on changing and adapting, and it's like thoughts are very slippery fuckers, and it will eventually just like go back into your non-conscious world, and then I just like wonder a lot of what's happening down. I spend a lot of time thinking about when you think about a thought and then you aren't thinking about a thought, and then that thought comes back to you the next day or a week later or whatever, but that thought has somehow changed and you hadn't thought about it since then. Like, what was that thought doing? And my way of thinking about it, I think it's living some sort of a life inside of your non-conscious world and being ran through all of these simulations and being reproduced and interacting with all of these other ideas that never even bubble up into our consciousness. And I find that really fascinating. And I think this is something that I've learned from psychedelics too, is that I spend a lot of time, I think that our non-conscious world and consciousness are always trying to communicate with one another, but they're kind of speaking very different languages. Our non-conscious is communicating through feelings and fears and joy or whatever, whereas our consciousness is sitting there like just kind of talking out loud, like, I want to exercise today, or I'm going to read right now, or whatever it might be.
Dang, I wish mine said that more.
Yeah. Well,
your conscious is like on it.
Right.
Well, but what I'm saying is like, that's just not what, like you can say, I should exercise right now, and that's not what happens, because your non-conscious is just like, yeah, we're not getting whatever messages that you're sending through. They're like, well, why would you want to? Plus, we haven't evolved for such a thing. Like, what?
Right.
Our ancestors didn't like. The idea of running on a treadmill is like the silliest fucking thing in the world. Like a hunter-gatherer that's actually having.
Where are you going? The subconscious is saying.
I kind of have an existential crisis every time I ever go to a gym. I'm like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
It is weird. I understand. I know what you mean by that completely. So I have a question for you that's related to that. Yeah. Do you think that our thoughts have an energetic, almost consciousness of their own, in a sense?
Yeah, I think they're alive.
I think so too.
I think so too.
I think that they are living beings that take shape and form of their own, and then even build worlds for themselves inside of our minds to like run through. And I think that it happens. You can have a simulation that you can simulate, like, especially if you're in a car and about to like drive off the road or something like that. You'll have that visual flash through your mind of like the 10 different things that could have happened if you weren't paying attention or whatever, and your brain can put that together really, really quickly. So your brain is building these parallel universes that don't actually exist in our physical reality, and it's building them in split seconds and running multiple parallel universes through your head at the same time to help you learn, to help guide your decision making. And how in the world that's happening is incredible. It must just be building representations of this world constantly updating it,
expanding and expanding and expanding. It's so funny because I walk around my neighborhood. I live in downtown Seattle, and if you're conscious and open these days, I'll have these walks where I'm just really plugged in, and you can feel thoughts sitting in the air, certain corners where there's like violent thoughts or certain like things just left over, and feeling an emotion and energy, and my brain will like pick up on the energy and play out a scenario or something like, this is a happy corner. Like, I feel like it's really picking up on a thought that's like kind of hanging right there. It's very interesting, which is why I'm moving to the country in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
There's a lot of thoughts hanging in the air in this city.
What was gonna start serial killing might just move to a farm instead.
Heather just kept walking by the same violent corner over and over. Like, what is happening?
You can feel like some shit went down right here.
A very violent corner right now.
You guys, it wasn't me. I just picked up on the thoughts in the corner. Hello.
The thoughts in the corner told me to do it.
You know, this is funny because this to me is what we're talking about is kind of a perfect example of semi-woo and like where this and I think that in the last 5 to 10 years especially, I've just picked up on so much more of a cross-section or almost like the blending of the quote-unquote like new age and the woo-woo and the spiritual and all of these concepts of, you know, energy and thoughts and meditation and the things that have been floating around our society and of course like picked up from a lot of ancient cultures, and what we're finally starting to research and find out once we dive into things with neuroscience and finally starting to study psychedelics and what they're doing with the brain. And I'm very happy that there is not so much, at least what I perceived when I was maybe in my 20s and kind of in high school, where it was this, you know, spirituality versus science, or like religion versus, it was always like, everything was always versus science, right? Like science knew everything and everything else was bullshit. And it seemed like, you know, the scientific community, or maybe the mainstream scientific community, always wanted to like debunk everything. Like, oh, we're going to prove that all that's bullshit. As opposed to, why don't we study, you know, these concepts that maybe aren't quote unquote proven in the, you know, the Western world? Why don't we study and see, you know, what is it that monks, what are their brains doing when you sit in meditation for a month? You know, like, what is happening to these people? Why are they doing it? Why is this a tradition? You know, it can't just be like, oh, that's old, so that's stupid. And I'm just really happy to see, and I'm really happy that your podcast seems to be unafraid of going to all those different places, and it's not just like a science podcast or a spirituality podcast or a religious podcast. You know, it doesn't have to be in a way like picking or choosing one of these categories. But a question I have for you, Shane, go ahead. Your thoughts on that?
I'd still say I'm a very science-minded person, but science just is really at a loss when it comes to consciousness. And science doesn't really know how ideas emerge in the brain. It can see these kind of neural feedback loops of where we maybe store the image of, like, I say the word like barn, and you visualize a barn, and like this one very specific part of your brain lights up. Like that's kind of neat that we know that, but we don't have a full understanding of how people are stringing together these long thoughts with these complex sentences with context and syntax and everything else, and we have an idea of where certain feelings are sort of emerging from, and where certain memories are sort of stored. Like, if you lose this part of the brain, you lose the ability to recall names or view faces, or whatever it might be. And but where this consciousness stuff is coming up from is, and we know that we're having these ideas, or at least there's not even any way of proving that we are necessarily having. These are all like subjective realities. Like, it might be that we're all in like Amanda's head right now, and she's the only one that's having any of these independent thoughts, and the rest of us are just these mindless kind of automatons. And there's no way of proving otherwise, but we all just kind of have to sit around and agree, like, hey, it seems like we're all having these ideas, and we're all experiencing, like, when you get poked or something, we all experience this thing that we're reporting as pain. So there's no way of proving that pain is even a real thing, but we kind of believe that it is, and it seems like there's a significant amount of subjective report that it seems like we've agreed upon as a society that pain is a real thing that exists. But it wasn't even that long ago that we didn't think like any animals felt pain. We just thought like if they howled or something like that was just like, well, that's just, the robotic sound that it makes when you press this button, and it just makes this sound that triggers this response. And maybe that's what we're all doing. We don't know, but it seems like there's something very, very complex going on in this incredibly complex computer inside of our heads. Considering the amount of processing that like a little bird or something can do that has a pretty small brain. And size of brain isn't everything. A lot of it's just the size of our bodies relate to the size of our brains.
Right.
Because it's just controlling more physical area. But what our brains are doing are pretty damn fancy.
Yes, extremely.
And we don't exactly know, and so that's not outside of science, but it's like also science doesn't have very good answers for either. Right. But yeah, I don't know. But then it's also, you can also say, well, we have agreed upon that we all experience these thoughts and this consciousness stuff, but then someone's like, maybe we're being controlled by lizards, and then well,
maybe we are.
Maybe we are. But that's certainly not.
I sure hope not.
People's subjective experiences, and that certainly doesn't seem to have a lot of evidence for it.
Right.
But then you have LSD, and you're like, oh damn it, we're being controlled by lizards.
Damn it, it is the lizard overlords. Every time I'm on LSD.
Well, you know what's funny is
there's also the insect ones. I've never seen the lizard overlords. I've never seen the mechanical elves, and I've never seen like the insect aliens that are like performing like surgeries on us or whatever. Like,
you know what's funny? After working here, a lot of people report back that the insect alien thing, they have different ways of describing it. And the reason to me, there's actually a little side note. There's someone who came to this center who's a scientist and a researcher in Canada. And he is he's doing a study right now where he wants to talk to people who have had like 1 to 2 ayahuasca experiences and get all of their feedback. And he wants to also have an extensive background history on them and compare. So his point is to see, does your religion and your upbringing and your current belief system, how much does that affect what you see and experience on ayahuasca? Like, are there actual themes that come to you from this quote unquote, mother plant, or is it really just affected? Like, well, I saw Jesus because I grew up with Jesus, or I saw Buddha or whatever. Right. So, the reason I thought of that was because just from my own personal experience of listening to a lot of the stories, I'd say maybe, in my 3 years here, over 250 people. There have been many people that reported in their own words having some sort of a insect-like or small creature-like worker on parts of their body that they have an injury, or people who had there was one guy who had a lot of concussions when he was young, and he felt them crawling out of his ears and into his brain. And there's a lot of people that report these tiny little like alien insect workers that are doing some sort of medical work, like physical medical work on the body, on the physical body itself. So I have never experienced that, but just from hearing it from so many people, and again, these people are from all over the world, different backgrounds. Most of them have never done ayahuasca. Most of them don't even really have much of a grasp on kind of the psychedelic world. It's not like people who are these major psychonauts who come here. It's mostly, strangely, your average Joe who's like, I have a lot of trauma. I need to get rid of it. I found this place. I'm willing to take these medicines and see what happens. So I would love to hear more about these insects. I don't really want to experience them, but I want to know about them. I know.
Well, I like that, like, it doesn't freak people out either. Like, I went down to a foreign country that's completely different world than where I'm from and what I'm used to. I drank a substance that someone like seemed to have mixed with their bare feet, and then insects crawled into my brain and then fixed.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? How many people are drawn to this? Like, when you think about how crazy it is that way. Oh, I missed you guys. Oh, wait.
When I did, I fixed my bad foot 6 or 7. Now it's back to. I mean, that's like, but that's also, it only lasted for that 6 or 7 weeks. So that's not, that's not like taking a couple aspirin or something. That is
right.
That's an intensive pain treatment.
Yeah. So Shane, tell us a little bit about. I know a little bit of kind of the history of your ayahuasca experience, but if you could give us kind of what led you to that and your experience with ayahuasca, I'd love to hear more.
Well, most of my experience was with DMT. I had done DMT about 100 times and really loved it. I kind of stopped. A lot of DMT. I just couldn't handle it anymore. It was getting to be too intense. But that's also because every time I was doing it, I was intentionally trying to do like more and more and more each time. So rather than like 3 hits, I would be doing like 10 hits of DMT.
Wow.
And
how long does that last?
The same amount of time. It's just more intense. And I would feel like one of the last times I did it, I thought I was having a seizure, or was very close to having a seizure. So that'll make you back off from the stuff a little bit. But
when you say intense, were you in like other realms or like going really far deep into?
Yeah. One of the last times, definitely my consciousness like shot out of my body and was flying around through some multiverse and was trying to find its way back to my head and was having a lot of trouble.
That's a seizure. That's scary.
Wow.
Yeah. And
my last LSD journey, it was my first time, and it was more showing me how all of this works, and that there's people that live out in the multiverse, some that want to, and some that are trapped out there, and like it's a real deal. And I had a lot of awe and respect for the journeying, and I was like, dang, this is big.
Yeah, I have. There's like people that I'd interact with in the DMT space, and people that would like catch me when things got too out of hand, and like come in and save me.
Oh, wow, so after 100 hits of DMT, or not even hits, like I mean times 10, or however many trips you had, as of today, February 10th, 2018. What would you say would be, from your experiences, and also just in your conscious life too, that you learned from that DMT space? Where is that? What is it? And how did it help you understand consciousness?
Well, it's only made me more confused ultimately. But for a long time, I thought that I was learning a lot of things about consciousness and the inner workings of the mind and how it works. And then lately, I've just been like, nope, I was wrong. I thought that was all in our heads, and I thought that it was definitely not going to a different dimension. And I thought it was like I would be like seeing these entities and whatnot, and I was like, well, that's cool that's like in our heads and our imagination can do that. And I guess there's like these little entities inside my brain that are doing whatever tasks for me, and I got to say hi to them. That's kind of cool. And then I, toward the end of my DMT use, I started thinking that was not the case, and that I was actually traveling to some other dimension or multiverse. And then when I thought about it that way, looking back on all of my DMT trips, it was basically like telling me what was going on, and I was like, what imagination? And then I realized that for years I've just been like talking to aliens and being like it was just like, I'm everything. And I'm like, well, you think you're everything in my head, and everything that's in my head, like everything inside of my head. And it'd be like, whatever, dude, I'm everything. And it was almost like comical to the thing, because it would show me like, I'd be like, okay, well, if you're everything, how do I know that you're everything? And then it would just flash in like 5 seconds, like everything that there has ever been and ever will be. And I'm like, well, that sure looked like everything, all right. And it's just like a shotgun of information to the. It was just like way too much to hold on to, and then I would also be like, well, what do you? Okay, let's assume you're everything. What do I do? And then it'd be like, well, just tell people. And that was even more hilarious to me, because I was like, well, tell people what? Like it's so intense and just so much of a clusterfuck that there's nothing to really tell people. Like, well, I'm going to this multiverse where it shows me everything that there's ever been and ever will be, and doesn't help my life. And then it's not like it's helping me predict lottery numbers or anything like that. Like, it's not. There's nothing to retain. It's like seeing all of your life in like a split second. You wouldn't be able to pick out, a part. Maybe you'd remember like one half of a moment from it that you pull back or pull out and report back and are able to describe for people. But what I had seen toward the end was that there was this like, and kind of I was seeing it all along, was that there's this thing that like somehow we all played a part in building this multiverse, somehow, or most of us, or at least there's a large group of us that are bouncing around through these different bodies through time. But it seemed like there's, to me, what the DMT space always looked like when I was kind of outside of it observing it was this flat fabric of computation that has, so it's just like all of these mathematical formulas like bumping into one another, and then once in a while two bump into one another that create some sort of inconsistency in this pattern, some sort of unpredictability, like these two patterns of organized, like you have these two mathematical formulas that explain these two different kinds of laws of physics or whatever it might be, and then when they combine, they form this new one, which then explodes into a universe, and our universe is one of an infinite number of universes. And so in our universe, this is just, all of this universe is just like crunching the numbers of what happens when we call like gravity or atoms or neutrons and protons and electrons or whatever. Like all of that stuff is just a new possibility that exists. And I think what's more interesting to it eventually, because I was like, well, who gives a... I always thought it was so silly that people think like humans are in some way significant, or that life on Earth is in some way significant. But I no longer think it's that silly. I think that what's more interesting than how rocks move in this universe or whatever, which I think is really pretty basic computation compared to what's happening in these networks within brains of different species. And I think it's about creating these connections, because these connections interact in new ways and create new possibilities. And I think that's the human brain on this planet is especially good at it. And so each neuron in our head is kind of reaching out to other neurons and looking to connect with them, which in turn, humans are these social creatures that are reaching out and trying to connect, and we're even trying to connect with other species. We're trying to study other species and communicate with fucking dolphins, and we're sending messages out into space trying to find and communicate with aliens, where we have this whole internet that's connecting each one of our brains is to us anyway, a very significant supercomputer, more than anything that than we've been able to build. And I think that we're finding more and more intricate ways to connect. And so I think that the reason why this kind of pattern that's creating all of this cares about us and intelligent things like other aliens that might exist in the universe is just simply that the computation going on in our heads is more chaotic and more creating more possibilities than just rocks and whatnot, which are really just kind of space holders. And so anyway, this fabric of computation, once it got complicated enough, gained a consciousness of its own and like learned to talk and like became aware of itself. And in my interactions with it, it seems like it also doesn't know where it came from or how it started. And it's just kind of doing its job, which is like creating these new universes, which are then filtering in information back into what I call this ever-expanding realm of possibilities, which is just raw data in this like weird holographic form. But then when I'm inside of it, there's like people and like entities and all these different worlds and tunnels and like endless amounts of shit to see. And And so that's what I've seen on DMT, and that's like that's like my final takeaway from like 120 DMT trips or whatever, is that this universe is one of an infinite number of universes that is filtering, that's more or less a simulation that is filtering data into this ever expanding realm of possibilities that is itself consciousness, that we think of as like a god or something like that, but it's just doing its job, just like we're all doing our human thing. It's just doing the god thing, and it probably has like parents and stuff of it's like, I had a mushroom recently where I saw this thing that I was like, oh, I'm talking, because mushrooms, after doing enough DMT, can like do the DMT trick. Like mushrooms can like do the trick of any psychedelic that your brain learns.
Yeah,
I feel. And so I was like seeing this like this massive like thing that you would think of as God or whatever. So I was like just trying to be more open-minded than usual, and I was like, all right, God, what do you want of me? What should I do, or what can I do to help? And then I looked a little closer, and it was like I was talking to like a fucking gear on this enormous machine. I'm like, oh, this thing doesn't know that I'm here. It's just like moving about and doing its thing. And then I saw that like this universe is all just like, this universe is like a breath that God once took on its way to other things.
Oh my gosh. I totally agree with that. I think it is. I think if
aware like, that we're here.
I mean, it like it is and it isn't, right? It's kind of like how if we want to be, we can, sit down and study and like think about an atom for a minute, right? Like we can read about it and we can say like, okay, what do they do and how many make up this certain space? But we don't really care, right? Like we just know they're there and they're doing their thing, and like, thanks a lot, atoms, for doing your thing. It's awesome. But like in our everyday life, like we just go about our day. And, I mean, the same could be said about everything we know. Gut.
You don't really think about the wars that the bacteria in your gut is fighting and what their lives are like. But there's a universe of life just like in your belly that just like
huge
just ends up in the toilet. And flushed
they lose a lot of good men.
It's just like universe is flushed down and I have this this guy that I met in his job. Like we were rock climbing together, and I'm not much of a talker usually. Like I turn it on for podcasts and stuff, but I'm not the most I'm like kind of a reserved person. And so I just knew he was a computer programmer and didn't really ask him about it. And then one day we were having lunch, and I was like, well, I don't know what a fucking thing about computer programming, but I have to make conversation. So I'll just ask him what he does. And what he does is he runs this app so you can download this app on your phone. And what this app does is it just runs ads all day long, all of these various ads, and then you can get paid like a few dollars each day or whatever for having these ads running on your phone. So people buy a bunch of cheap phones, connect them to Wi-Fi, and then have all these ads running and like end up making a couple $100 a month or whatever at the most. But that's like his company just runs these ads and then gets paid by these marketers that think they're reaching actual people. But
that's hilarious.
In the corner, like running this thing. And I think that's like what our lives are like, is we're just advertising ourselves to this thing. Like, hey, God, we're here. Look at us. We're looking for you. And just a fucking in some fucking phone of some alien's like apartment that just like makes them a few extra dollars a month.
Wow.
Dude, so like live. You know what I mean? And like tread lightly because I live in Seattle and I'm not that far away from the Aurora Bridge. But a lot of people might be being like, why then would one go about their day and live if?
Well, that's a great question.
That is. And wait, this reminds me, Shane, of something that you said recently that I have repeated to a few people here and quoted you for saying it, which is life isn't meaningless, it's meaning free. So I want you to kind of explain that.
Yeah, I mean, most of what I study is evolutionary psychology and biology, and I mean, at the end of the day, we are these kind of vehicles for our genes, and the reason why, like, say, sex feels good is because it motivates you to reproduce, and the reason why it's, having friends feels good is because social life was very important, and what gave humans this distinct advantage was that we were able to collect ourselves in larger and larger numbers than, say, the Neanderthals, which were larger and smarter than we were in many ways and had more sophisticated tools. But we were able to collect in larger and larger numbers, mostly over bullshit. Mostly we were able to be like, there's a horse monkey god and we need to fight for it. And people will be like, yes, we need to fight for the horse monkey god. And having that belief in this like ridiculous thing was enough to get people together to cooperate, to fight off whatever rivals and to work together to hunt better and to drive every other fucking thing into extinction mostly. And that's all. And that's like, what, like at the end of the day, that's like, well, high fives make me feel good. It's like, well, the reason why high fives make you feel good is so that like you'll cooperate with that person so that you can like slaughter other species like that. But we're now so far beyond that most of like what's happening is so like it's just bonus now. Like we have so much free time built in. We've now like kind of conquered what we need to conquer, and I don't give a fuck about my genes. I know they don't care about me because they can't. Our genes are just doing the gene thing and being replicated and reproduced if they're lucky, and if they're not, doesn't matter. They're just, most of life is an evolutionary dead end. And so ultimately we have all of these instincts that drive us in these various ways, and if we learn enough about them, then all of a sudden we can be like, oh, I can hijack this system. There's all these life hacks that we can do where we can be like, hey, this makes me feel good, so I can get more of this. It turns out that if I do opiates, they'll make me feel really good. But that's not sustainable because there's this hedonic treadmill that we're all on. So it turns out that if you jog every day, you'll get this runner's high thing that will release endorphins that will make you feel a little more satisfied in your day-to-day life. So then we're all having to do these things, but we can kind of tell ourselves whatever bullshit that we want to, and that's pretty amazing. The fact that we have like most species is really limited in what they are able to do, and they have very specific evolutionary niches and very specific tasks, very specific. I mean, just sex alone, the idea that we are having sex like just to have sex most of the time is ridiculous. Most species would never bother to have sex outside of like the time that females are fertile. That's the only, like, why would you bother any other? Right. Most species, males and females, aren't even like interacting with one another, and then the females become fertile, and then they're horny, and those are like this really awesome horny time, kind of. Also, lots of dudes die competing for those females.
Yes, they do.
It's time, boys.
But and then it just goes. But we'll have like guys will have sex with like a pregnant woman. Like, that's fucking crazy. From an evolutionary point of view,
it really is.
literally no way that can lead to pregnancy, and you're still and like we can both the male and female, sometimes the female can feel pleasure from from doing that.
Sometimes I love that.
And so that's amazing. Like that's not we're not just having to do this thing that feels good for the one time every year or few years. If it was just for reproduction, we would only be having sex every 3 years or so, because normal hunter-gatherer breastfeeding isn't fertile for like the first 2 years of life. It's different nowadays because we use baby formula and everything else. But that would our lives might only be having sex every 3 years. That's the only time that we need to do it. But now I get to masturbate and have this lovely satisfaction just by myself in a hotel room.
In a hotel room. I'm going to cut together the part where I asked. Yeah. I'm going to ask about the meaning of life and then just cut to you talking about masturbating in a hotel room. And that's going to be the podcast.
Life is what you make it.
I totally agree. It's funny. I was watching this pretty silly, kind of funny movie called Date Night the other day here, and it's like Steve Carell and Tina Fey, and it's the classic story. It's like, the busy husband and wife who never do anything but go on a boring date, and so they get into this crazy adventure. But they're talking in the car, and the wife's talking about how busy she is, and she never has any time to herself, and all she does is kids and homework and school and work. And she's like, all I want to do is just go to a hotel room by myself and sit on a bed and no one is around and just drink a Sprite. And the husband was like, that sounds awful. Right. And I'm thinking, that sounds like something I want to do, at least once a month. Just go away from everyone.
Yeah. And you can, I mean, and we might be able to figure out if we learn about really how to hack this system, because money is this new thing that our brains really don't know how to deal with, this new form of bartering system. And then but it's kind of hijacking our status system, and it's this very it's this number that is our brains like these really measurable things, whereas meditating you can be like, I meditated 20 days in a row, I have accomplished that. But if you're not tracking something like that, it's hard to be like, today I meditated better than I did yesterday, and therefore my life is better and I am more fulfilled because I am increasing my hedonic pleasure through this meditation. It's very, very difficult to measure, even though we know meditation ultimately makes most people a lot more mindful and more enjoy life more. But money is a thing that's super easy to measure. So someone can be like, well, this year I made 55,000, so I will be happy if next year I make 58,000, because that is an increase. And that's something that doesn't actually make us happy in reality, but it's this really nice, neat little number that you can look at, and our brains are just like looking for these easy explanations. So it might be that one day, with enough information, with enough changes in our education system, and enough changes in our diets and patterns and behavior just within our culture, what if eventually, TV, I mean, it's really going to take entertaining shows about that, highlight the positive side of meditation and diet and stuff most of the important lessons in life are really boring. So there's going to need to be sci-fi shows about seeing
kale and
that make you count your calories and meditate more or whatever. But eventually it might be that we are able to kind of train ourselves to become mindful and healthy and sustain on not nearly as much finite amount of resources, but enough to kind of where we can kind of spread it out enough to maybe have a livable wage and maybe limit suffering so that the world's a safer place and there's not as much crime and there's not as much poverty. Who knows?
I hope so.
Any of that? Is any of that?
We're headed that way.
I don't know. I don't know what.
I mean, it seems to be, and this is a question like both of you guys can answer, but in my opinion, from my Amanda's perspective, it seems to be that the draw toward, like we were talking about earlier, going to a foreign country and drinking the foot stew and having aliens work on your brain, that's becoming so much more normal. And it seems to me that it's because people are like, okay, I've tried everything else and something has to change, not only in me, but something has to change in society. Like, big changes need to happen. I think people at least are admitting that now, and they've seen that the powers that be and the government and all of these supposed things that were supposed to take care of us and society telling us how we're supposed to live, they're starting to see it like that isn't true, so we need to figure out a new system. And a lot of this too with diet hacks and brain hacks and figuring out how to have our best lives, that plant medicines and psychedelics are a part of that. At least I think that it seems to be they are.
The other thing about psychedelics is they're such an intense experience that it's almost like there's no other thing like that. Like usually in life, if like a roller coaster is thrilling, you need like a more intense roller coaster to have it be thrilling again, and then the roller coaster just needs to be scarier and scarier. The TV show needs more tricks to make it. It needs to be more violent or more cerebral or better dialogue or more expensive budget or better cinematography, or the car that you own needs to be fancier. And most of life works this way, off of this hedonic treadmill where we just need more like sugar and fat and everything. There has never been a time in our evolutionary history where it didn't benefit us to have more of everything, because most resources were scarce throughout our history until quite recently. And but the psychedelic experience is such a I mean, I've had a 10-minute DMT trip where I am telling you, I've lived like 5,000 lifetimes in that 10 minutes, and like had whole relationships with other entities that like I spent thousands of years with and don't remember their names for some reason. But
shame on you.
I know, thousands of years with like good friends that I can barely remember. And then you come back and
it's Glenn, your lizard friend. Jesus.
Yeah, I know. And they're watching me right now, being like,
they are shaking their heads.
That's old Shane. Never remember.
Classic Shane. Can't remember a damn thing.
But the thing is those experiences are so intense. Like psychedelics are the only thing where the human mind seems to go, and I've seen enough for a while. I think.
Oh yeah.
I want to go. I think I just want like a nice hike.
Right.
I think
it does.
Could sit and do nothing for a while and be content with that.
I just kind of want to go to Chipotle and hang out. Some normal human shit.
I mean, that's how, Heather, that's how your LSD trip was, where you're like, I just want to be in this world. This world is great. I don't need to be out there.
Did this world. Like, it was so cool to see all the other ones and like see what people are doing out there and like the passageways and the amazement. But I love planet Earth. Like, I love being a human. It's fun. I love playing with all the possibilities in this world. It's great. Yeah, it's really great. But when I journey and when I explore and travel, it's wonderful too. And I learn so much, and I love bringing back what I learned on my journeys to Earth to play with, like extra materials. It's awesome, an extra appreciation.
Yeah, I think the stronger, like the DMT and the ayahuasca, and like the stronger psychedelics are especially relate to that, where it's not something I've never heard anyone after an ayahuasca trip say, "Huh, can't wait to do that again. They're just like, it's not something that happens. Like, if the people here, they know they have to do 1 or 2 more, like, they never have said that.
My last ayahuasca trip was like the best trip I've ever had in my life, and it was supposed to be 2 days in a row, like doing ayahuasca 2 days in a row. And I did the first one, and it was the best day of my life. And so normally, you know, you would think you'd be like, so let's do that again. Let's have the best. And I was like, nope, I'm out. I'm not.
I'm out.
Second day, I'm fucking done. I got it.
Yeah.
I got what I needed.
Yeah.
I'm out of here. And I am not the fucking type to leave the blackjack table. Like I am on there until I've lost all of my money, and will never learn that lesson. But psychedelics, for whatever reason, are the one where I'm like, oof, I can walk away from that table.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm supposedly supposed to be doing ayahuasca tomorrow, and it's been 1.5 years, and I'm like, yeah, it might be too soon. I don't know. Yeah. You know, it's so funny like that.
And I'm like, wow, how does every time I do psychedelics, my roulette number, it just lands luckily enough on the fucking number each time, and I normally come back. Where who knows? Although I haven't always come back. But.
Yeah, tell us just a little bit real quickly about, I know that it's obviously an in-depth story, but the time that you didn't exactly come back after an ayahuasca trip.
Yeah, so I've only done ayahuasca 3 times, and the first 2 times I thought were pretty weak sauce. I was like, well, this is like a fun mushroom trip. That's just like a little bit different, but it's certainly not DMT. And then I did ayahuasca this 3rd time, and I did quite a bit more of it. And you know, I was told it was a strong batch because that's what they always say. I've never heard like a shaman be like, "Oh, we got a real weak batch of." I've heard a real weak batch of ayahuasca.
Go ahead and keep your cell phones out. This one's weak. You're gonna want something to do.
Yeah. And so I basically, long story short, ayahuasca told me that we need to shift the way in which humans communicate with one another, because we've lost our, like, we now get our information through television and like pundits yelling at one another, and we need to go back to sitting around the campfire. Like all of our reality has been dreamed up by our ancestors just sitting around the campfire, but we've gotten away from doing that for so long that now like reality has lost control, and we've gotten like all of the best ideas are formed by groups of people sitting around campfires and having these experiences and hashing it out. That's where that's throughout our evolutionary history, that's where all the good ideas have come from. And that's like why we've kind of lost ourselves. That was like one of the messages. It was just like a delightful little message. I wasn't taking any of this trip very seriously. I don't ever take trips very seriously. I'm just like, okay, well, whatever. I'll interpret this. I'll see this like little narrative that it's trying to show me, and then I'll take it with a grain of salt and write it down later. And then it told me that I had a DMT experience while shooting a documentary, where I had the cameras there, and it told me that I was supposed to tell people like what the DMT space is and to put it into words, which I thought was silly because like that's like just impossible to do. And
but you
so
did
then
earlier this show.
Yeah, right. And then, well, I am getting pretty good at it, but
yeah, you are.
But then, so it told me that I was going to be like some spokesman for DMT. Like I was going to look like told me that it was going to make me look like a crazy person, and then I was just going to have to break things down in like a balanced, laid back, like scientific way. And I wasn't, again, I'm not taking any of this seriously. This is just like what it's showing me. It's showing me like all of these scenes of me on like podcasts and on TV and stuff like that, breaking this down for people in ways that they can understand. And then, and it was using specifically at the time this, I had a guy on my documentary that's this DMT-X project, which is this DMT extended state project. So using IVs, potentially having like 6-hour long DMT trips rather than 6-minute long, and having these prolonged trips so you can get your bearings. And so it was like, it was telling me that that somehow this is playing a role. And then, long story short, it was just like, so are you ready for this? Because we're going to deliver all this information to you right now. And I'm like, sure, I'm ready. Like I always just like am like that in these DMT spaces and whatnot. I'm like, sure, whatever, God or aliens, like show me what you're going to show me. Like I could give fucks, but you can show me, it's fine. I don't find it helpful to like attach or resist too much to anything. Well, anyway, this time it was like, here you go. And then I just felt this surge go through my mind. I've never felt anything like it. And then the whole house that I was in just started shaking. And then, and I thought that was in my mind. And there was way more to it than that, the trip than that. It was about time going cyclical and all of these same kind of characters keep on popping up in throughout society, throughout time, and they keep on changing with the times a little bit, but these patterns are very cyclical, and I'm seeing all these patterns, and then the ayahuasca trip was done, and I'm like, hey, did anyone else hear like the house almost collapse? And the people on my side of the room were like, oh yeah, we heard that, and the people on the other side of the room didn't. And then we looked and like we went down in the basement, and right under where my head was, there's just this enormous crack in the foundation of this house. And I'm like, well, that's fucking weird. And that was just like strange. What coincidental timing that this thing that seemed like God or whatever was just like, here you go. Here's this dense packet of information that I'm going to give you. And that's right when that happened. But you
don't think it was energetic?
There had been rain recently there and whatnot, and so it was like
just scientist.
Yeah,
I'm like, that was the energy of the download, like crack the foundation.
Yeah, but I mean, it certainly looked like I put a fucking crack in the foundation with my mind, but I didn't want to believe that, and then I got off of the, I went down off of this mountain the next day, and I had phone reception, and the first text message I got was from this DMT extended state study guy who was like making the announcement about the study in 2 days, and like filming it for this channel Gaia TV and whatnot. And he was like, will you be the first volunteer for the extended state? And I'm like, what the fuck? That's like exactly what ayahuasca told me was going to happen last night. And then there was another thing like this I had this vision of this scientist who I liked during my ayahuasca trip, and he also wrote me, and I hadn't talked to him in months, and the second message I got from him was from him. And he was like, hey, sorry you wrote me and I hadn't responded. I was away for a while. By the way, here's this paper that I wrote. And the paper was on changing the education system, which was exactly like, it was what my trip was about. And I was like, this is weird. And, just putting myself out there, I was like, I just was thinking about you in an ayahuasca trip last night. And then he's like, weird, I wrote this paper while on mushrooms. And
all the plants were hanging out.
That's awesome.
And then And then just stuff started happening. I just started having all these synchronicities in my life. Just like my environment started changing. I started believing, like, I would come up with an idea and I would write it down, and it'd be like about time travel and how it would work in reality, and how ideas pass through time, and how messages can be sent back into the past, and so once you like solidify something that happens in the future, it can potentially change the past and change the present, and life is like unfolding in the present. And so I would come up with an idea, and then all of a sudden it would seem like I was on a different timeline, like all of these different things in my life kind of changed. I would even look at like a website that had this art on it, and then I would like further an idea, and then I would look at the website again, and like only 20 minutes had gone by, but the website had changed, like I was on a parallel universe, and I just felt like I was traversing these parallel universes, and so then I couldn't sleep, and every time I tried to go to sleep, it felt like whatever I was tapping into on DMT, whatever like entities that I was visiting were trying to come through my head, like trying to come back through the other way. And I was waking up feeling like these aliens or spirits or gods or whatever were like taking over my body. And it was kind of scaring the shit out of me. And just really, really weird stuff kept on happening. And the first week was really awesome. I had all these great ideas. I was doing a lot of writing. I would have an idea about, like, say, time travel, and then someone would be, like, playing a song, and there would be, like, some reference to time travel in it. Or I'd have some idea about the multiverse, and then someone would, like, flip on the TV, and it'd be some show talking about the multiverse. Like, it was just...
I fully believe those synchronicities are, like, a message from, like, the other side, like, yeah, no, it's real. It's happening. Like, we're here.
But so
this
many
is the only way that you
time.
pay attention.
That must have been crazy, like so many happening over and over.
This was like 100 in a day. And
wow.
Like I'd be listening to a song, and it would be like describing like where I was and like what I was looking at. And I'm like, what the fuck is happening to me right now?
Did you have anyone around you that was witnessing this, that could like witness any of these things happening with you?
Well, Kate, my girlfriend, was with me, and she was like... first off, like, I was going on and on about this stuff for like 6 hours at a time. So she was just like bored with hearing about the multiverse. She'd be like, you didn't ask me about my day. And then I was like,
you're like, I'm creating the universe here, and you went to Chipotle.
Yeah, I was like, I was being chased by the future.
Like, no, but I just thought of a red pen, and here's a red pen.
Yeah, exactly.
I get it. You seem to still have a little skepticism. Like, I've been hearing you be like, do you fully believe that journey was like a message or like a path or a vision or like? How does
I mean, I think the things that were happening to me were pretty real, but I don't know what that means. I'm not sure any of my ideas. Like, I've been reading more physics and stuff since that, and I'm like, I don't fucking know anything about physics. Like, I've read physics before, but I don't, like, I'm certainly not a physicist, and I certainly don't have the capacity to further these ideas. I mean, I think that's a part of, that's been a big part of what my role, like, a lot of people do these plants, and then they're like, I had a vision, and I'm supposed to, like, do this business for charity now, or I'm supposed to be a shaman, and like the guy that gave me DMT is just like, DMT told me to give DMT to as many different people as possible, but DMT is always, whenever it's given me any kind of instructions, it's always just been like, just put this into words. Like, all you're here to do is just put this into words and articulate this experience for people.
Wow.
So I'm just trying
That's
to
cool.
do that. And
I'm glad that we could be a part of that. That's pretty awesome. I'm glad that we get a piece of your insight.
Oh, I mean, it's also like creepy to, like, at first I was like, am I a chosen person? and after a while I was like, fuck that. I just want to, like, like I almost quit comedy and quit doing my podcast and quit. I was just like, I just want to be a regular person. Like I don't want to be like delivering messages from aliens.
Right. Sorry. That's what you got.
That's
the ticket you pulled for this.
This is funny. Buddy. Like this is what I was when Shane and I were in Jamaica. We got to talk a lot about this and a lot about just that feeling of, you know, am I just going to be a regular Joe and live my life and kind of have my little life and, you know, affect the people around me the best that I can and whatever, or are these kind of these big ideas and these feelings of like, wait, maybe I'm supposed to be on the other end of the spectrum, like leading humanity into the next consciousness evolution. I mean, that's the spectrum, right? Like, I'm going to be an average Joe and sit in a house, and like I am some sort of a leader that's, you know, using these tools and our words and our podcasts and the things that we have to actually lead people into that. And a funny little story I'll tell you is that kind of like Shane was mentioning earlier, that once you have taken a few different types of psychedelics, and this is something I just found out recently, that different medicines can kind of come through other psychedelics, which I never even had an opinion on because I'd never heard anyone talk about that. Like, hey, I was doing LSD and all of a sudden, like, weed was there, right? Yeah. And so for me, I was doing mushrooms as a facilitator, a very small amount compared to what other people were doing, and I physically saw the mushrooms, like, go away from my experience. And ayahuasca came in, and she's like, "Yeah, what's up? I'm here." And I didn't believe it for the longest time. I was very skeptical. I'm like, I'm making this up in my head. This is just a mushroom trip. And she's like, "Stop saying that. Like, you can just keep saying that, but it's me. And it was like really weird to experience something else using, you know, a different psychedelic coming through, right? And I won't tell you specifically what it was, but she gave me super specific messages for Shane and another guy that was at the retreat, and I was so afraid to talk to Shane about it. I was like, ayahuasca. I'm like, I'm not doing this. He's gonna think I'm crazy. He already like is a skeptical person. It's gonna sound. And she's like, you have to tell him today. And I was like, do I really have to do it while I'm on mushrooms? I mean. Come on. Can I not wait till like I'll write it down and I'll tell him tomorrow at breakfast when we're in. And she's like, no, you're gonna tell him today. And I'm kind of in a similar vein that Shane is, where I like to take the whole psychedelic experience as like, maybe this is my mind, maybe it's this magic medicine, maybe it's a real message, maybe it's not. You know, it's just, you have to kind of take it like that. But then there's like just this feeling sometimes that's so strong, and you can, even in your head or telepathically speaking, however it is you're kind of speaking with these entities, and you can really just tell them out loud. I was telling her, I'm like, nah, I'm not going to do this. And she's like, yeah, you are. And so you're like, damn it, I really am talking to something real here, you know? And it's just such a, every day I think I vacillate somewhere between like kind of average Joe status and, you know, changing the world status type thing. But I think we can hopefully get to do both. You know, we can hopefully get to live in our little meat bodies and have our regular experience and, you know, be a human. And if it turns out that we really need to be on the forefront of, you know, pioneering these plants and, you know, helping humanity evolve into its next level of consciousness, then I guess so be it too.
What else are we going to do?
I know.
At the end of the day.
Yeah. I'm pretty bored. I guess I'll save humanity.
I guess I'll just get out there and crack jokes for good.
I know. That's kind of what's going on there. That's totally
how my
true.
dad sums it up, at least.
That's a really nice thing. Cracking jokes for good.
They thought I was a yoga teacher for years, so that's as far as they would go down that road. But
yeah, I'm pretty sure my parents think meditation is like talking to the devil. They have no clue. You should see the look on their face. They just have no idea, which is very fine. They're very sweet. But okay, Shane, so to wrap this up, kind of the last question I have for you is kind of where you're at with everything that you and I had talked about, which is, traditional shamanism and these plant medicine centers. And then there's a lot of the more modern retreats and modern ways of doing psychedelics, doing it by yourself, doing it in a small group of people, of course, in a safe set and setting. And from just your experience, what would you say to people who are thinking of getting into this world and using psychedelics in a responsible way? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, one, I think that psychedelics are amazing and can help a lot of people. Although lower your expectations, or not lower them, just free yourself from expectations of any kind, if you can. And then, I think it's only going to get better, but we live in a time where it's really easy to get on the old internet and do some research and find some people doing these things professionally. I've always been like I still want to do ayahuasca by myself, but that's because I'm a lunatic. I think that these controlled environments are definitely the safe route to go. I would definitely worry about people just making their own ayahuasca, having never done it before, and been like, oh, I'm just going to do ayahuasca at my house.
I can't imagine, but people do it.
Yeah. I think that they have a lot to offer. I think that it seems like they're good. I don't know. I've gone to a psych ward because of them, but I also have been doing psychedelics for 21 years, and they've been pretty much nothing but a positive influence on my life. And even when I went crazy and didn't sleep for 3 weeks and ended up in a psych ward and became really paranoid and everything, ultimately I am now a much better person for it. And I'm in really good shape and really mindful and taking care of myself and more productive and happier and more satisfied and caring more about things that have a little more value and watching less TV and just all around I'm a better person. And so maybe I just needed to go a little crazy to reset the system. I think that's another big part of it is I think all the new connections along the way, some of it is just there's this construction process and you can't take anything too seriously during the construction process until it's done. But yeah, I feel like I'm way for psychedelics. I wish more people would do them.
I think more people are, Shane.
I know. I hope that we're at least. I just love the conversation around them right now, and I love the freedom to finally feel like I can express myself about psychedelics, and the dial is being turned down quite a bit on the knee-jerk reaction of oh, crazy hippie LSD weirdo, all of those things that used to be associated, and it's very exciting. It's kind of an exciting time right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Go drugs.
Right.
So what we're saying is
that's what we're saying. We're not semi-woo. We're totally woo. In case you guys hadn't realized it.
Yeah.
Each week it gets more and more like that. Of we really need to take that semi out of our name, Heather. Eventually, right?
That's how we rope them in.
It is. It's how we appear normal to everybody else. Well, thank you, Shane, so much for being on this podcast. I could honestly sit and talk with you for a very long time, and I had so many more questions that led to more questions that led to more questions as you were speaking, which just reminded me of everything you were talking about, which is that our thoughts are just endless and creating multiple universes. And I hope that today we have created some beautiful, interesting thoughts that can live in the happy corner in Seattle. Heather, you can replace that violent corner with some of these good thoughts today if you want. Anything else from you two as we close the show? Did I lose you? Did I lose everybody? Oh my gosh, you guys, I am alone in the universe. It's very sad. Well, I love you. I love our audience. Thank you guys for listening. It looks like those two checked out and went and had a little Seattle coffee date. So my name is Amanda, and I'm checking in for Heather and Shane Mauss, our guest today on this awesome psychedelic episode of Semi-Woo. We'll see you out there in the multiverse somewhere. Goodbye.